Adjunct Professor Moran, Macroeconomics 111. In this session, we're going to have a numerical example of fiscal policy. Don't be thrilled by the word fiscal. Fiscal. You know what a calendar year is. January through December. Well, we need a word for a business year, and businesses don't always start in January. They start whenever the businessman organizes his business. So a fiscal year refers to a business year, and specifically with respect to earnings and spending and financial results. The federal government's fiscal year runs from October through September. This is when the Constitution started, in October. And so traditionally, historically, the government's fiscal year runs from October to September. And our focus will be on the variables G and T, which the government can control in order to adjust the economic equilibrium and adjust it from a recessionary or inflationary equilibrium to a full employment equilibrium. Fiscal policy. All right. Fiscal policy is the use of taxing and spending or both to fight recessions or periods of inflation. One-time fixes passed by the government are referred to as discretionary fiscal policy. And permanent laws that are in place are called automatic stabilizers. During the 2008 recession, President Obama passed legislation specifically aimed at ending that particular recession. The money was spent, and then the program was over. It was a one-time piece of legislation to fix a one-time problem. But there are changes to government spending and taxes that happen automatically when economic conditions change, like the tax code or unemployment. And since they are constantly on the books and will change as soon as the economic conditions change, they are called automatic stabilizers. So let's say we have a recessionary scenario. Here it is. Aggregate demand is in the horizontal range of the short-run aggregate supply curve with an equilibrium of 485. Let's say we want to increase aggregate demand to here at 505. Now notice that in this example, I'm calling this full employment, but it's really not. Full employment will truly be out here. But we encounter a problem when aggregate demand shifts into the intermediate range, which we're going to discuss in a later session. So for right now, let's assume we only want to increase aggregate demand in the horizontal range. So our GDP full employment, we're going to say, is at 505. Our actual GDP is at 485. As a result, we want to increase GDP by 20. 505 minus 485. Increase GDP by 20. That's the same whether we're going to do this by a change in government spending or a change in taxes. In order to make this change happen, we have to know what the multiplier is. The government's going to start the ball rolling by some change, but then that change in spending will be caught by people as income, which will then be partly spent and partly saved, and that will multiply the original change in government spending and result in a larger change in GDP than the original change in spending, which is the definition of the multiplier. Let's assume the marginal expense consumed is 0.75. Every time someone receives an additional dollar, they'll save 75% of it, or 75 cents, and they'll save the remaining 25%, or 25 cents. The spending multiplier is 1 divided by the marginal propensity to save, which is 1 over 0.25, which is 4. So we know that the multiplier 1 over the marginal propensity to save, 1 over 0.25 equals 4. If we decide to do this with a change in taxes, we'll need the tax multiplier. The tax multiplier is a negative marginal propensity to consume divided by the marginal propensity to save. 0.75 divided by 0.25 is a negative 3. The tax multiplier is always a negative, and it's always 1 less than the spending multiplier. Because the first round of a change in spending counts, and then subsequent rounds of income and the leakage of savings result in subsequent changes. That income change and subsequent changes are the same for a change in taxes, but the initial change in spending is not there. It doesn't count. The government sending a tax cut to a citizen is not counted in GDP, so that doesn't count. But the subsequent spending with the leakages does count. Okay, so how much do we have to change GDP? How much do we have to change government spending or taxes to affect a change of 20 in GDP? The formula is change in GDP equals the change in aggregate demand, in this case government spending, times the multiplier. We know we want GDP to change by 20. 485 increasing to 505. Changing 20. We know the multiplier is 4. Dividing both sides by 4 isolates aggregate demand and results in a answer for aggregate demand change equaling 5. So a change in government spending or aggregate demand of 5 will result in a total change in GDP of 20. And this is how it works. We're at 485. The government increases spending by 5. We're now at 490. Round 1. Original change of 5 plus 5. There are 3 subsequent rounds, 2, 3, and 4, for a multiplier of 4. 4 times 5 is 20. We've already used 5. We have 5, 10, 15. So the invisible hand takes over here. Government has increased spending. There's an unplanned decrease in inventories, which is good for businesses. So they will respond by producing more. When they produce more, they'll have to hire more workers. Income goes up. When income goes up, aggregate demand shifts to the right further. And that will give us a total change of 20, bringing us to 505. If we want to accomplish the change with a change in taxes, we need to, instead of using the spending multiplier, use the tax multiplier. The formula is very similar. Change in GDP equals change in taxes times the tax multiplier. We know we still want to change GDP by 20. 485 increasing it to 505. Tax multiplier is a negative 3. 20 divided by a negative 3 gives us a tax reduction, a negative tax change of 6.7. So, if we notice that the change in taxes has to be larger than the change in spending. That's because the spending multiplier is larger than the tax multiplier. And the reason the spending multiplier is larger is because the purchase of GDP counts where there is no change in GDP with the tax change initially. This movement is the same in both government spending and taxing. This one's missing from the tax one. When the government buys something, it counts. Then that expense will be caught by people as income. When a tax change has happened, there's no change in GDP. All you have is the subsequent change in spending resulting from the transfer payment, tax cut. You can practice with this, which has been posted online, reducing GDP in the vertical range to fight inflation.